Okay, well, let's welcome Vanessa Beeley to the program. Welcome to the program, Vanessa. Oh, we can't. Are you muted?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Okay, good. Right. Now, look, here's what's going on. The BBC has decided to produce a new program for Radio 4, which they're calling Mayday. And Vanessa, they have decided that you and some others, including Piers Robinson and the Syria Working Group for Propaganda and Media, are going to be the subject of this to some degree.
Well, yeah, in theory, it's looking into the life and times of James Le Mesurier, who, of course, was the founder of the White Helmets in 2013, former British military intelligence officer, and died very mysteriously in November 2019, supposedly jumping from the balcony of his house in Istanbul. Of course, since then, there have been a number of reports highlighting his involvement in the embezzlement of funds that were being paid by the British government and various other governments, including the Dutch government, to Mayday Rescue to be siphoned to the White Helmets inside Syria. And so, therefore, I'm really struggling, scratching my head a little bit. I can only assume that the BBC has been tasked with protecting the construct, with protecting the reputation of James Le Mesurier posthumously, and also potentially protecting his wife, Emma Winberg, who is deeply embedded in some of the organisations that have recently been exposed by the British government documents leak, to be basically aiding the armed groups, including terrorist groups inside Syria, with media, PR, and general whitewashing.
Now, just to explain to people, this British government document leak that you're talking about is a leak which came out, I think, 3-4 weeks ago, apparently from the same people that released the Integrity Initiative documents. Now,
Exactly.
we haven't had time to go through those in detail yet. What are your thoughts on them so far?
Well, I mean, they've effectively been confirmed by the British government. A report came out in Middle East Eye. The only comment from British government officials was that they were horrified that a Russian cyber attack had been carried out and the documents had been lifted from their website. Now, of course, what is extraordinary is they said basically, well, everyone knew we were doing this anyway, so the documents are irrelevant. What's more important is the Russian cyber attack. So, extraordinarily, the British government is effectively saying, well, yeah, of course we did that. But we're more worried about the Russian threat. So, effectively, the documents themselves have been verified by the British, by the UK Foreign Office, and they are genuine.
Yep. Okay. Well, look. Let's just briefly put the lovely Chloe on screen. This is the lady who has written to you to give you a list of questions. So let's just run through some of the things that she said. First of all, one lawyer who we've spoken to tells us that someone who spends time with Syrian ministers and who is publicly calling for humanitarian workers to be bombed may be liable to face charges of aiding and abetting, inciting or conspiring to commit a crime under international law. This could appear to apply to you. I noticed they use the word could.
And appear.
Yes. You never said that, though.
Sorry?
You never said that.
I never said what?
Or you never called for bombing of anybody.
No, look, I mean, speaking seriously here, I mean, first of all, I have to say I'm pretty horrified that the BBC, which is at the end of the day, it's a media outlet, isn't it? It's not an extension of UK state power or intelligence power, is it? I'm astounded that a media platform is basically issuing legal threats. Now, this is an extraordinary precedent. I'm not aware of any media platform having done this in the past. I could be wrong, and I certainly, I haven't spent a huge amount of time researching it. But I find it extraordinary, and I find it a very precarious situation that we're in now. I think, of course, based on the back of the treatment of Julian Assange, we know now that there is a concerted attack against dissident journalists. And the feeling that I have is that the BBC are now empowered to threaten journalists that are challenging establishment narratives, whether it be on Syria, Libya, Iraq, on coronavirus. Because of course she also calls me a coronavirus skeptic and conspiracy theorist in her list of accusations. Going back to have I called for the bombing of the White Helmets, I've made the very clear case that the White Helmets cannot be considered a humanitarian organization when they are embedded with a designated terrorist organization, i.e. Al-Qaeda, and of course ISIS and various other armed groups that are effectively working under the umbrella of Al-Qaeda in Syria. They are providing aviatory surveillance for Al-Qaeda via the Hala system, which we've discussed previously. They are involved in the persecution of civilians and ethnic minorities. They have been involved in the execution of civilians and prisoners of war. They do not behave in any way like a humanitarian organization inside Syria, and therefore they themselves are legitimate targets in a war situation when the defending armies, the liberating armies, are fighting urban warfare to clear hospitals and schools that are occupied by Al-Qaeda with White Helmets in association with them, acting as auxiliaries for Nusra Front and Al-Qaeda. So therefore, I believe I'm perfectly correct in saying that they make themselves a legitimate target. Have I sat there and called for their bombing? No, and I don't think my calling for their bombing would have any huge effect on Russian and Syrian military either.
Right. Okay. Well, let's look at this, because the accusation also is that you're not a real journalist because you haven't contacted the White Helmets, Mayday rescuer James Le Mesurier when he was alive, or his family, to check your facts or get your response to your allegations about, to get their response to your allegations about them. But of course, this isn't true either.
No. I mean, actually, unlike Chloe, who, to my knowledge, and I've asked her repeatedly, she's not responding to my request for information. I don't believe she's entered Syria. She's certainly not entered what I would call free Syria, the real free Syria, the Syria that has been liberated from the terrorist occupation. Her only contact with people from inside Syria, to my knowledge, has been in her documentary speaking to former Free Syrian Army militants who, of course, were also responsible for many of the early atrocities inside Syria. And a paper that she wrote in 2014 entitled, or rather she contributed to and was a major driver for, produced for King's College, the War Department, entitled The New Jihadism. Now, I've actually been contacting Chloe this morning because what's fascinating is, as part of the paper, they put Arar Sham, a group that the UK and the US have avoided designating as a terrorist group, in with Jabhat al-Nusra, which of course is Al-Qaeda, and Islamic State, as effectively a Salafi jihadist political organization. Now, bearing in mind that the BBC Panorama Saving Syria's Children report, which Robert Stewart has forensically exposed as a staged event, during the making of that event, the BBC producers were embedded with Arar Sham. So they were embedded with a group that Chloe herself has admitted is an extremist Salafi jihadist political organization. I don't actually like the term jihadist, but we assume from the paper that she's describing them as effectively a terrorist group. And we also know that the British government, from a statement by Alistair Burt, has been in contact with members of al-Sham as part of the externally managed political process inside Syria. In other words, the creation of a shadow state by the British government. So all of this information is being studiously ignored by Chloe. As I said, I've put questions to her this morning. I'm yet to receive a response to them, but I've asked her how she can ignore the fact that BBC Panorama was embedded with al-Sham when she herself in 2014 describes them as effectively a terrorist organization, and how she has managed to avoid investigating the British government collaboration with al-Sham that have carried out hideous atrocities and massacres inside Syria against the Syrian people.
Well, look, there's one of the questions. During the filming of Panorama's Saving Syria's Children, BBC producers were effectively embedded with the Ahrar al-Sham militants. Could you please let me know if you've ever queried how it is possible for BBC production teams to collaborate with an extremist Salafi politically motivated armed group without one, being harmed, and two, declaring a clear conflict of interest and potential collaboration with a terrorist group that has committed numerous war crimes and atrocities in Syria? And well, I guess the answer is silence.
So far, yeah, silence. I mean, another interesting thing that came out of conversations with Chloe yesterday is one of the people that she's interviewed for the program is an old school or Sandhurst chum of James Le Mesurier. Now, Harry Wynne Williams. Now, when I look into Harry Wynne Williams, I mean, what we need to understand is the kind of nest of propagandists that are surrounding James Le Mesurier, including his wife, Emma Winberg. But Harry Wynne Williams basically was with Bell Pottinger from 2006 onwards, and heavily involved in, of course, the various sort of embedded media and PR operations to create destabilization in Iraq, which were managed by Bell Pottinger. Harry Wynne Williams, as a close old school friend of James Le Mesurier, was then part of a company called Acadian. Now, Acadian, according to the leaked British documents, worked very closely, hand in glove, with ARC Group, Analysis, Research and Knowledge, where James Le Mesurier and his first wife also worked at the time that the White Helmets were being established. Now, Emma Winberg, his second wife, who was with him when he died mysteriously, and of course her testimony has a number of anomalies in it, let's say gaping holes. She was one of the co-founders of Incastrat with Paul Tilley, who then went on to create into a new organization effectively doing the same thing as Incastrat. But Incastrat, as we know, was paid by the British government, the Conflict Stability and Security Fund, to produce the whitewashing PR for Jaish al-Islam, who of course were responsible for the massacre of civilians in Douma and the staging alongside the White Helmets of the Douma chemical hoax, which has been proven a hoax by the expert testimony of members of the investigative team. So, I mean, basically what I can figure out from what Chloe has said, when I pushed her for further information, she told me she didn't want to give away anything about the series. So effectively what I can concur from that is the series is going to be testimony from those that are actually responsible for the war effort against the Syrian people for the last 10 years.
Yeah.
Vanessa, if I may, has Chloe actually said, can I come and interview you? Has she's, suggested that she actually comes to sit down and talk with you?
No, I mean, she contacted me back in June with a very curious approach. I mean, her initial research was totally off. I had to correct the accuracy of some of the statements she was making from the beginning. She then approached me on the basis that she wanted to talk to me about my father. She wanted to talk to me about my time in Gaza. And the question arising in my head is, why on earth do you want to spend the 5 minutes that I have for the program talking about my father and my time in Gaza, when effectively this is about my investigations into the White Helmets and the potential of an independent investigation into this group for committing war crimes, as they stand accused of by the Syrian people. Syrian people, of course, who Chloe has not got in touch with or reached out to or spoken to.
Yeah.
Well, Vanessa, of course, the BBC doesn't have the best reputation with respect to Syria. So this is a Telegraph article from a few years back, 2012, it looks like. BBC News use Iraq photo to illustrate Syrian massacre, or they have done that on a number of occasions. And of course, this gives me the opportunity once again to remind everybody about BBC Media Action. Here is Juliet Harkin, formerly BBC Media Action. This is a quote that Brian dug up for an article. We, BBC Media Action, worked in 2004 with individuals within the Syrian ministry who wanted change and tried to get them to be drivers of that. All media development work has been done in Syria. That has been done in Syria has, in my opinion, been predicated upon this idea that there can be change from within. You have an authoritarian regime, you find who the reformers are within that, and you work with them. Now, if anybody wants to find the document that this came from, it is this one. It's called Country Case Study, Syria. It's from BBC Media Action. And what amused me slightly here, Vanessa, was that the subhead here is support to media where media freedoms and rights are constrained. But in fact, what's really going on here is that the British, the BBC, through organisations like BBC Media Action, but also other organisations like the Thomson Reuters Foundation, go into these countries ostensibly to help develop media, but what they're actually doing is running regime change operations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we talked about it the other day that James Longman, another BBC, well, he later became a BBC correspondent, but he was initially embedded in areas occupied by the armed groups very early on in the conflict. In fact, possibly even before the early so-called uprisings began. He spoke fluent Arabic. As I said, he was embedded with the armed groups, and he was picked up very quickly by the BBC and sort of converted into a BBC correspondent. Alongside, and of course, at that time, he was working alongside people such as Danny Abdul Dayem, Rami Jada, all of whom were producing fake news for the army of media operations that were working towards presenting the picture of Syria that would manufacture consent for another humanitarian war. So we have to take it as read that, yet again, I mean, we know that the BBC, from John Pilger's film, The War They Don't See, was heavily involved in promoting the casus belli for the Iraq War. We know that historically the BBC, as they are doing with COVID-19, are there to shore up British government and British intelligence narratives. They do not deviate from establishment narratives. I mean, it's interesting that one of the accusations they put in there is anti-Semitism. Well, of course, I mean, you know, that's bound to be included alongside the usual, I'm paid by Russia, I'm paid by Assad, I'm embedded with Syrian ministers, etc., etc. I mean, I have to say that the list of slurs is incredibly unimaginative. I mean, there's nothing new in there other than the fact that the BBC is effectively threatening me with legal action. I do have to say, and Chloe, my dear, if you're watching, please do take me to court, because as a state media outfit, that would enable me to demand information from the state, to present witness testimony, and to present evidence that you're clearly trying to shut down.
Okay, well, that's
a very good challenge, Vanessa. Yes. Well done on that one.
Just finally, Vanessa, have we any idea when this program is finally going to be produced or come out?
Well, apparently I've got until Monday morning to send back a response to all of this. Peter Ford, who's another target, former British ambassador to Syria, has sent back a very typically scathing reply. As he said, he kept it short and sharp so that they would read out the entire statement. And I think, you know, I'll probably be doing the same. I'm certainly not going to be responding to any of the, well, they're not even questions, actually, to any of the statements. And I will be sending Chloe a list of similar statements regarding, as I said, the embedding of BBC producers with Al-Sham, that she has designated a Jihadi Salafi extremist organisation.
Yes. Okay. Vanessa, thank you very much for joining us. We'll have to move on, but we'll keep everybody informed as this develops.